Welcome back from your break. My name is Mindy. I'll be the facilitator for this session. We are now going into an introduction to differentiated instruction with Holly Shamowski. She's from the Kuwait and Patricia District School Board. She has been in education for 17 years. She has worked in the communities of Hudson, Sioux Lookout, Savant Lake, and Pickle Lake. She has worked in both elementary and secondary schools as a teacher, and more recently as an administrator. Over the years, she has worked as a classroom teacher, a special education resource teacher, literacy coach, and a special assignment teacher for special education. She holds teaching specializations in special education and reading, and most recently, she completed her Master's of Education for Change with a specialization in social justice and Indigenous education. She's currently the principal of Savant Lake School and a member of the KPDSB Rapid Response Northern School Team. So tons of experience. We're happy to have you. Take it away. Holly, are you there still? I think we might be having some technical difficulties. Bear with us for a second, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I am so very sorry. I was just saying, I did all my speed tests and everything else. So I'm sorry about that. But thank you. Well, I guess I'll thank the internet for reconnecting me here. Hi, everyone. I'm Holly, and I'm going to now share the screen or my screen so we can get started talking about differentiated instruction. Okay, so here I am. That's me. Thank you, Mindy, for that wonderful introduction. Everything that she shared is what I've done. When it's said all in a paragraph like that, I'm feeling like I'm aging myself. I have been in education for 15 years now. And my journey with differentiated instruction started back in 2007 when I was a grade 6, 7, 8 teacher. And over the years, I've been able to share my knowledge of DI with many different schools, groups, and educators. And my hope is today that you will be able to take at least one thing away from my presentation and use it in your classroom tomorrow. Before we get started, really, and if we were face-to-face, it would be a great way for me to gauge where everyone's at, but you'll see a poll come up. And if you could just quickly let me know what division you are currently teaching in. And if you're not a teacher, just click other. So I could just, when I'm talking about different examples in the classroom, I can know where the majority of the people are joining us today. And while you are finishing up the poll, I would like to go quickly through the agenda. As this is an introduction to DI, we are not going to have enough time to dig deep into a lot of these topics. However, I will go over the basics of differentiated instruction and give some examples of what you can use in your classroom. After the slide, we will get into some differentiated instruction definitions, some myths, getting to know your students, learning environment, process content, assessment, and then I will also share with you some resources that you can use along your DI journey. And as well, before we move on, I'd like to share our school board's land acknowledgement. I know we were joining from many different parts of the province today, so please reflect and acknowledge the land that you are connected with today. We recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which the Keewatin Patricia District School Board works. The KPDSB acknowledges their presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. From coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this nation home. Please take a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and consider how we can, in each in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Hopefully now everyone has been able to go through poll number 1. Again, I'm going to ask you for a little bit more information. If you can share with the group today, indicate in the poll how familiar you are with the topic of differentiated instruction. DI has been around for many, many years. It's not new, but I think it is something that is always still relevant. So that's why I wanted to make sure that I was able to share information with you on DI because it is extremely useful in any classroom, in any teaching and learning scenario. So you will see another poll pop up and let me know how familiar you are with differentiated instruction. And while we finish up that poll, I will share the learning goals for today. And by the end of this presentation, I hope that we will understand what differentiated instruction is and is not, know the 4 main aspects of differentiated instruction and what it may look like in the classroom, and then also understand how differentiated instruction fits into the assessment practice. Now, I'm wondering if the tech team can share the results from poll 1 with me or with the group before we move on. Okay, wow, we have a splattering of a lot of different people from everywhere. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. A lot of others. I wish we were face-to-face so I could understand more about what that other is. Thanks, tech team. And by any chance, are now the results for poll 2 available? Oh, and they are. Great. Oh, that's poll 1 still. Okay, great. So wonderful. This is what I was thinking what was going to happen. It's very much, we use DI often in your classroom. That's great. Okay, so it may be a lot of the things that I chat about today are things that you're doing, but hopefully you can take something away that can grow your understanding of differentiated instruction. Okay, thanks, tech team. All right. So first off, what is differentiated instruction? Differentiated instruction is an effective classroom instruction that is responsive to the learning preferences, interests, and readiness of the individual learner, so your students. DI is best thought of as an organization structure or framework for thinking and teaching and learning. It is not an initiative, a program, or the latest fad, nor it is simply a new label for something we're already doing. When we respond to student needs, we differentiate. Now, you may already be doing things, DI in the classroom, like you've mentioned in the poll, but we have to remember that it's the conscious thought, planning, and reflection that makes differentiated instruction most effective. So some myths. What differentiated instruction is not. I know when I started my DI journey, there were lots of teachers that were not hopping on the DI bus, mainly because of these myths that they thought DI was. But it is not an individual lesson for every student. It's not specifically meant for students on IEPs. It's not an equal way to assess everyone. And it's not chaotic or unstructured. It's actually very structured when you think about it. And it's not more work for the teacher overall. Now, I understand that the last one could go either way. If this is all new to you, and if you're a new teacher, sure, there might be some extra work at the beginning for your learning and for your reflection. However, overall, if you're planning in your classroom for your lessons always through the lens of DI, then everything does become easier.
Holly, I don't want to interrupt. I just want to let you know that we can't see your slides. You might have to share them again if you are showing them.
Okay, I sure am. Thank you for that.
No
I
problem.
think that will bring us back. Sorry, everyone. Do we see them now?
Yes,
Perfect. Okay, so everyone didn't really miss much. It was just my emoji eating a sandwich. Now, here in this slide that we can all see now is one of my favorite visuals that I've come across when learning about DI. Of course, this is an extreme, silly example. However, I would like to point out something here. If the goal in this comic was to climb this tree, sure, make the students climb the tree. Really, in this case, the monkey would be the only one who is successful. However, if the goal was to reach the top of the tree, this allows for a few more animals or students to be successful. With differentiated instruction, it really only works when you have a clear understanding of what you are asking your students to do and how you can use their students' strengths to help them be successful. For to be at DI to be effective, you need to get to know your students. And coming up next is a little bit of information on how to get to know your students in different ways. So getting to know your students is, I believe, the most important part of differentiated instruction. Building community in the classroom is the first step it was in my DI journey. Trust and respect need to be a two-way street so students are comfortable when taking risks and understanding that fair isn't always equal. One of the main things I hear from teachers who are skeptical about DI is that they think the students will look around and say, my work is different from so-and-so's work. And then they're going to complain and start asking a lot of questions. But the thing is, the work may be different. Students need to know that they may learn differently than their peers. They have strengths that are different than their peers. So for them to have that understanding, the work may look different, and that's okay. So if you're able to create that environment in the classroom where the students understand that, the DI journey will be a lot more smoother for you and for the students you're working with. Now, there are a lot of different ways to get to know your students. You can use differentiated online resources and surveys. I've included two here. One is the multiple intelligences, and the other one is to find out if your students are auditory, visual, or kinesthetic learners. Those links are live in the slide deck that I've shared with everyone. Feel free to download that, and if you click them, it will take you to the online surveys. Now, in the surveys themselves, it would be the student who would do those surveys. So it would maybe be better off for, junior kids, intermediate, maybe senior students in high school, because, the students would have to read the questions in front of them. Now, if you're working with a primary classroom, you could still also do that. You might just need to read out the instructions or the questions to your students. Other ways to get to know your students, of course, and I think the best way is just to have that conversation, get to know them, create that relationship, get to know what are their strengths and what they take interest in. And the more you can weave that into your lessons, the more your students will be successful. Now, Carol Ann Tomlinson is one of the major leaders in differentiated instruction in the education world. And she breaks DI down into 4 different areas: learning environment, content, process, and product or assessment. The first one we're going to look at today is the learning environment, which could be the classroom, the school, the library, or even outside, anywhere the students are learning and interacting with each other. The learning environment is really the way the classroom works and feels. So when thinking about how you could differentiate your learning environment, ask yourself, how can I set up my classroom for differentiation? What elements of the learning environment can I differentiate to help my students learn? Now, this may take you, out of your comfort spots. This may have students learning on the floor, learning under their desk, learning under the table, learning on a couch, learning on a stool. I know there's lots of different, chairs or seating, different seats that schools can purchase for their students to be more comfortable. But think about adding different options for kids in the classroom, because just because, I worked best at a desk sitting traditionally doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone. So just keep that in mind. Maybe you can have bean bags or couches, even those little tents that you can have in the classroom that provide a quieter, safer space for students. Think about incorporating those into your classroom so kids have a different place to learn. Of course, different other examples are providing resources that reflect culture and home setting, and also creating routines that allow students to get help when the teacher is busy. So that's a big one, because when you have students working on different things at different times, you're always going to have that student, teacher who's interrupting your work with another group or another student. So making sure that you've worked with your students ahead of time so they know the routine of what to do to ask to get help that is not you is really important work to do beforehand, before you get into these other more rich tasks or differentiated instruction strategies. The second area that you can differentiate is content. So, using the curriculum and learning goals as your starting point, but making sure that you can be creative from there. Your professional judgment here is key to balancing what you need to do as a teacher, AKA teaching the curriculum, but also the needs of your students. And I know it's definitely not an easy job, because you have the students in front of you who are all at different readiness levels, and you need to be able to get them and teach them where they're at. So balancing all of that can be hard, but if you are open to doing different things and open to different differentiated instruction strategies, you can make it work in your classroom. So some examples to differentiate content are listed here on this slide. So I'll read out a few of them. Using reading materials at variable reading levels. So even though you might be in a grade teaching grade 7, making sure that you have books that all the students can read, even if they're at a lower reading level or a higher reading level. And also different types of text. So whether that be graphic novels, comics, magazines, or even different reading text that can be on the computer. Also have students create personal dictionaries or word lists, and you can even use pictures to help, because not all of our students are great with text. So if they're more of a visual learner, it may help them to make those connections with pictures. And of course, I think the most important piece here with anything when we talk about differentiated instruction is allowing student choice. Getting to know your students allows you to know what their interests are, and then you as a teacher taking those interests and embedding them in your lessons and in the curriculum makes them feel a little bit more connected to what they are learning. As well, some students may have a hard time picking topics if you're allowing choice. So it's also really good to perhaps have a pre-made list of a few things that you know they would be interested in to get them kickstarted on their task. The third area we can differentiate is the process. When we talk about process, we are thinking more about what you are doing as the classroom teacher. How are you using the information you gained from the relationships you've made with your students, and how can you provide guidance and direction that they need to learn? Process is the activities in which the students engage in order to make sense of and master the content. And for this piece, reflection as the teacher is really important. If you've spent 2 days teaching a math concept and there are still a few students who haven't grasped it yet, please don't go and teach it again the same way, because that obviously isn't working. You're going to have to reflect and think on yourself as a teacher. How can I teach this math concept differently to have those students connect with what they're learning? So ask yourself, when you are differentiating the process, how can I differentiate the ways that I help students learn? And then also, what type of activities will the students engage in to meet those learning goals? Some examples: flexible timelines, different groupings of students, and also using that information about grouping of students. Mix up the groupings all the time. You know, you always want to allow students to work with their friends, but they also need the opportunity to work with people who are different than they are, who learn differently than they are, so they can learn from each other different strategies of learning. And of course, allow for inquiry and interest-based centers and activities. The last area, but certainly not the least, is the area of assessment or the product. Not all of your assessment needs to be a product or a physical thing that you bring home to mark. Assessment can be anything that demonstrates student learning, like culminating assignments. They could be tests or really projects that show what the students have demonstrated, whether it was a single task or something at the end of a unit. Ask yourself, how can I differentiate the ways that I assess student progress towards their learning goals? And how can I differentiate the ways that students demonstrate what they understand and can do? So when you're thinking about this, again, some examples are on the slide. How can you use observation, conversation, and product to assess the student's demonstration of learning a skill? Encourage students to create their own project assignments, as long as the assignment contains the required elements. This is, a really good point. It kind of goes back to that comment. If you're just wanting the students to have the goal of reaching the top of the tree, allowing them to get there however way they want is okay, as long as they reach that learning goal. So making sure that you know what you want the students to demonstrate and letting them be creative outside of that is really important. Okay, so right now I'm going to give your ears a break and I'm going to stop talking, and I'd like to share a little video that is a great summary of our introduction to differentiated instruction. I'm not quite done talking yet, but we'll have a little bit of a break from my voice. Now I'm going to stop share for a moment and then share the video.
I'm Larry Filazzo. Differentiating instruction. To some educators, it conjures visions of having to create a different lesson for every student in the room and long nights of planning and grading. That insanity is not what differentiation is all about. Differentiating instruction is really a way of thinking, not a pre-planned list of strategies. Oftentimes, it is making decisions in the moment based on this mindset. It's recognizing that, to paraphrase Rick Wormerly, fair doesn't always mean treating everyone equally. It's recognizing that all of our students bring different gifts and challenges, and that as educators, we need to recognize those differences and use our professional judgment to flexibly respond to them in our teaching. Carol Tomlinson talks about the ability to differentiate in 3 areas: content, process, and product. For content, student choice is one way we might differentiate, like allowing students to choose their research topics or essay prompts. As teachers, we need to keep our eyes on the prize. In other words, we have to keep asking ourselves, what are the main learning objectives? One day, my students were writing an argument essay about what would be the worst natural disaster to experience. John's head was down on the desk. He was not doing anything. I knew that he was interested in football, so I told him that he could write an essay on why his favorite team was the best. He would still have to make an argument just about football instead of hurricanes or earthquakes. His eyes lit up. He got to work and wrote what his mother later told me was the first essay he had ever written in school. He had followed all the guidelines of a good argument essay. The prize, in this case, was learning to write an argument essay, not learning to write about natural disasters. To differentiate by process, teachers can change up how they group students. Sometimes a mixed ability group might work best, while sometimes it might be appropriate to have same ability groups. We might have an English proficient buddy work with an English language learner to help them out. During independent reading time in my early morning class several years ago, one student tended to fall asleep. I told him that if he wanted, he could go to the back and sit on a desk and read. Soon, several others joined him. A few days later, I saw another student dozing off. Before I could say anything, one of his classmates whispered to him, "Just go sit on a desk." Again, it's a matter of keeping our eyes on the prize. What are the learning objectives and what are the best roads to get there for different students? Teachers can also differentiate by the type of product students create. The major demonstration of learning doesn't always have to be an essay or a multiple choice test. One year I had a student who liked to doodle when other students or I were talking. I told her it was okay as long as she was doodling about the information we were discussing. She built on those doodles to create a final project that brilliantly and visually represented all the key points we had covered. When I give tests, I often give students an extra blank page where they can write anything else they remember about the topic being tested that they think is important. I often find the quality of thinking and writing better there than in response to my test questions. None of the differentiating strategies I've mentioned have created any extra work for me. They did require that I had relationships with my students to know their strengths, challenges, and interests. And I needed to demonstrate flexibility in my thinking. Making these strategies successful also required building a strong class culture so that some of the students were being treated differently and they understood why. And they understood that that was the only way to be truly fair. The ideas mentioned here are just a drop in the bucket. There are a zillion other ways we can support our students' gifts and challenges. We just need to keep our minds and ears open.
So I think that is a great video that really sums up the different things that we're talking about today, and is a great video to share with your colleagues if you think it is something that they would like to get into as well. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen back up. Hopefully everyone can see it this time. And I'm going to share with you, this is something I don't always do in this presentation, but we do have some time. So I'm going to share a few examples that I've used in the classroom, differentiated instruction ideas that maybe you might find useful. So the first one here is profile cards. So back at the beginning when I was talking about getting to know your students, and of course that is something that you do, a profile card is a great way that you can organize all of that information. Now, this was way back in 2007 when using Google and the internet and technology things weren't something that we were doing every day. So this is actually made on a cue card. If that doesn't work for you and you're very techie, there's a lot of different templates or programs that would help you organize all of this information as well. But if you're old school, you can do it this way. So as you can see here, hopefully it's not too small for you. Again, all of these slides you can download and take a look at later, is that you have the student's name, and then you had what their multiple intelligence is, what type of sensory information is the best for them to take in information, their interests, their preferences on how to work, and it's all there. And I would punch a hole in each of them and actually keep them on a little O-ring and keep it in my desk. It also helped me when I was creating groups. So if I wanted to create groups of similar sensory intake, we could do that. Or if I wanted to mix it up, I would know which students had which interests or had which intelligence, and we could mix them up or keep them together depending on what we were doing. The next idea, and this is really simple. This is an example of a diagnostic assessment. So there's two different ones here. One is, of course, it's called Quick Draw. The one of the map, teaching geography. And of course, this is a map of the world, but if you were teaching younger grades and we're talking about teaching Canada or teaching about even your local community, you can just quickly ask your students, hey, draw me a map of Canada just using your memory. And then you will know ahead of time which students have a really good understanding of what Canada looks like geographically, or the world, or Ontario, or the local community, and really quick. And then you don't have to mark this or grade this. You can just simply look at it and you'll know where the student is at. The other two examples here are about time. So it was a math lesson, and it was the teacher just quickly asked their students, on this piece of paper, draw what you think a clock looks like. And as you can see, lots of different ideas. Students had lots of different ideas of what the clock looked like. And then you can go from there. You'll know the starting points or the readiness levels of where your students are at. Four corners is another great way to get kids up and moving in the classroom. And again, very low prep. So this is, it's good for small groups, large groups, and oral language. You would set this up physically in your classroom, and I used weather here, like stormy, beautiful beach, lightning, and then also a calm meadow. So you can pose a question to the class, and they would go to the specific corner, whether they agree, strongly disagree, somewhat disagree, and then while they're there in their corners, they can talk to each other about why they're there. And it's a good way to get your kids up and moving, and then maybe talking to different people that share a similar opinion about something. Okay, these are, of course, everyone knows what a Venn diagram is, but I wanted to just note that when we're thinking about differentiated instruction, it doesn't need to be crazy planning or groupings. It could just simply be a different way to do something you were going to do anyway. So if you were doing a Venn diagram, instead of just having a black line master that they would sit at their desk and fill out, have them work on the floor with hula hoops and sticky notes, or up on the board in pairs, as they're up there. It could be all sorts of, they can do it on different online tools. So this is just a creative way to do a simple thing you were doing anyways. And I think when you get kids up and kids doing something different things are activated in their brains, more connections are being made, and makes class a little bit more fun. 4 on a mat is another example of just getting kids up and talking. This is really good for debate or point of view. In this scenario, it was a health lesson that I was doing with my grade 6, 7, 8 class years ago, and they were taking on different roles. One student took on the role of a doctor, one took on the role of the teen smoker, the teen's parents, and the teen's friend. And then they were to talk about why or why not they want the student to stop smoking. And they were all able to take on that role and talk about it. Again, a really good oral language strategy. Now, this could have been done at their desks and writing out on a sheet, but this is a way to get kids up and talking and interacting with each other. For assessment, the teacher could be walking around to the different groups, listening to what they're saying, maybe have some key points. If you hear the student say those key points, check them off. That's your assessment. It doesn't have to be anything too crazy. Getting into the two, bigger ideas when you're talking about, product or assessment when doing things with kids. Choice boards are excellent. They're probably the easiest and best way for you to build in choice and to allow students choice in doing their work. So I know this is really small and you can't see it, but there's like a tic-tac-toe, the black and white one there. It was just a choice board on different writing styles. So it was at the end of the year, the teacher wanted the students to kind of put together a portfolio, and the students were able to pick any 3 that they wanted to. But if you also wanted a little bit control, you could have all students start at the middle. So all students have to do the middle bit. That could be anything you really want all of your students to do, like an essay. If you wanted that 5-paragraph essay, then they could start in the middle, but then they have the choice of where they branch out. So that's a great way to work in some choice. Now, the 2 other examples here, and you'll see if you download the slides, they're online choice boards. So they're actually a choice board set up with hyperlinks so that the students can click the link and go to that activity, whether it was a web page or another Google classroom assignment or whatever. It would take them there and then take them there. So again, building in choice, but you only have to do it once and all students have access to it. The last piece here is a raft, one of my favorite different ways of providing choice. So again, depending on what you're teaching, and you're going to have to be creative in how you do this, but Raft stands for role, audience, format, and topic. So the students worked in choice, so they can take on any role that they wanted to. And this was put together. As a teacher, I put this together, but you could even create this raft with your students, and then they can choose from there. So as an example, we could have a student who takes on the role of baby bear. They're doing a writing piece whose audience is mama bear. The format of the writing is a journal entry. And then the topic is explaining why you're upset, if we know the story of the 3 bears. So that, pretty basic. Something that's a little bit more, for those kids that need a little bit more of a challenge, they can take on the role of the broken chair. That's something that's a little out of the box. Their audience is Goldilocks, and that writing format is instructions on how to put me back together. So that gets kids thinking in a very different way, but not all students are at that point to be able to take on that role. So, but with this one example, or this one activity, you've built in choice, you have your students writing, and you can go from there. Now I'm going to skip all the way back to where I was. We were there with the video, and now we're on to the resource bit here. We're getting close to the end of the presentation. So if you were to walk away from this presentation or this workshop with any other resource, I would say please go and download this one. It's the Differentiated Instruction Scrapbook. It's a great resource. It is put together by the Ministry of Education, and I know those ministry documents can be a little dry, but for use in the classroom and getting into differentiated instruction, whether you're a teacher, a principal, or someone in education, this is a great place to start because it includes everything. It has unit planners, lesson ideas, lesson planners, all of the definitions and everything I talked about. It is all there laid out for the teacher to use, or for the principal to use, or for school teams to use. It's all there, and you can download it by just clicking the link at the top of that slide once you download the slide package. There are also some other great resources here on the list. The link to the video that I shared with you is at the top. There's also a lot of other great ministry documents on differentiated instruction. Learning for All and Growing Success, again, ministry documents, but those are the 2 key documents that we use and that I use as a principal with my new teachers all the time. The Ontario Teachers Federation page is also great. And then another link that I use for a lot of different resources and understanding is the LD at School. LD stands for Learning Disability here. So it's a great site to learn more about how you can differentiate your lessons for students with different learning disabilities. And of course, link to Amazon if you are looking to look for different DI books and resources. Okay, so as we are getting to the end of the day, I would like to share with you another poll, one more task to ask of you. So when you see it pop up, if you could please let me know how you're feeling about DI now after our very short presentation. I'm hoping that you can walk away with one new idea or something that you can use in your classroom. And if you're not a classroom teacher, maybe share with a colleague, whether it's the resource or the slide deck or whatever it may be. If you could share in the poll one of those responses. And while you're doing that, I would like to share my information. Of course, I only have 45 minutes with you. But please contact me if you have any questions about DI. I'm not a guru, but I've been dealing with DI for a long time now, and I've used it in many different scenarios with many different classroom groups and students. So please reach out. My email is there. Also, follow us on Facebook. I'm a member of the Rapid Response team with the KPDSB. So part of our job is to do professional development with groups of teachers, with schools, or with different education authorities. So if you would like to learn more about DI or other topics like literacy, numeracy, wellness, or outdoor learning, we have presentations, whether it's 1 hour or half days. We can work with you and your teachers to learn more about different topics. We've also done book studies with classrooms and even with staff through a PLC. So if you have any more, or if you would like more information about that, please email me, follow us on Facebook, and also check out our website if you would like to learn more. And I think we have some time for questions, but before we can get to that, if I could see the results of the poll before we go to questions, that would be great. Awesome, that's good to hear. If you are unsure, please reach out. I did share all of the information. Please reach out, we can learn a lot more. And I also feel like most of the people who responded A were probably just as confident before listening to me for the past 40 minutes, but I do hope that you did learn something new. So with that, thank you very much for coming to my presentation today. Feel free to download the slides, check out the links, and contact me if you would like more information.
Thank you so much, Holly. That was such great information. There was a lot there. Differentiated instruction is so important, as we heard from our student panel earlier. If you attended that, students are really crying for that attention, that differentiation, paying attention to what they individually need. So that was wonderful. Thank you so much. So far, I don't see that we have any questions yet. But it was great you provided your contact information, and those slides will be available as well. So you will be able to reach Holly outside of this event if you need to.
Great.
Okay, so still no questions. So, all right, so just as with every other session you attended, there is the play to win code. For this session, it's growth. So when we take a little break here before we head on to our trade show, please take time to enter that in, or you can enter it at the end of the event as well.